Right, let's talk about HS2, shall we? What on earth is going on with it? That is the million-dollar question. Apparently, this morning, it was saying that it wouldn't even be able to reach the end of the line, which is supposed to be Euston. Apparently, you'd have to get off to the west of it and get a tube to the end of the line, which is laughable, really. This whole thing, I'll pick up with you first, Paul. You know, this whole thing, I think it was first moved to 2009 by Labour initially. Here we are now, decades later. The project is vastly overrun, behind schedule, hugely over budget. Is it time to just sack the whole thing off? Yeah,
the whole thing is an expensive folly, as far as I'm concerned. It should never have been introduced in the first place, and even now I'm inclined to say the whole thing should be scrapped. I think the whole project is unsuited to our country, to the landscape of the country, particularly to the size of the country. We're a small country. We're, nothing like the size of France, where they do have high-speed railways and they've got the space, frankly, for them. I don't think we do. And to think that it's going to despoil vast parts of our countryside, I think is really, really a negative thing. I would like to see the huge bucket loads of money that have been spent on this ridiculous project. I would like it reinvested in the railway system that we've got, which is clearly broken, which is dirty, which is expensive, which is fragmented, and which should, frankly, be renationalised as a matter of urgency. Oh, God. Take the railways back into public ownership, use the money for that instead, and let's get a better rail system than the appalling system that we've got.
So when you say about nationalisation or renationalisation, you look at HS2, which is largely overseen by public sector bodies. Do you look at that and go, that is a shining example of what the government could do when it focuses on transport, so therefore let's have more of it?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's clearly a place for the market in these things from time to time. But I think when you look at the effects of rail privatisation since the 1990s, you look at the huge subsidies, even now under privatisation, that the taxpayer is paying, who's gone up something like 200% since privatisation. You look at the fact that many fares have doubled in real terms since privatisation. You talk to anybody who uses the railway system today and talk about their experience of it, and people will say it is by and large, it's an appalling, fragmented, expensive, dirty service. And I think that people who instinctively are not necessarily in favour of nationalisation of utilities and services and industries and whatever, even many of those people actually understand the case for renationalisation. I almost managed to convince Nigel Farage of the case for nationalising the railways, and that really tells you something.
Are you convinced at home, nationalisation, renationalisation, is that the answer to our transport woes? Where do you stand on it all, Alex?
If Paul continues that argument for long enough, then maybe you'll run out of people who remember what British Rail was like and you'll have some success. But I think there's enough people, at least for the moment in the voting population, who are capable of understanding the seismic change in
British
our
Rail
railways.
was worse than what we've got
Absolutely.
now? Come on.
Absolutely. And you can pull the ball over the eyes of a millennial, but you're not going to achieve it with me. And the other thing I would say is, look, in many ways, you've got the best of both worlds now, even from Paul's perspective, because you're forgetting half of our franchises are effectively nationalised at present. When things don't perform under the arrangements that we have, the state takes them back under control until they are fit for re-release into the private sector. Now, what I will concede is that it's always difficult to try a privatised environment in which the basic infrastructure, in this example, the tracks and so forth, is under one set of fiscal rules and one set of ownership, and the vehicles you put on it are under another. But that, in the end, is a question about practicality and implementation, not about the principle. And in my mind, the principle of privatising the railways was unquestionably right, not that this was what the debate was meant to be about. So back to HS2.
But are you seriously saying, so you say the principle of privatising the railways is right. Are you seriously suggesting, well, you've already said that you think it was better than British Rail. I mean, I noticed you didn't pick up on the point about the huge increase in subsidies we're paying at the moment to the train operators. Are you also saying that the system we've got at the moment is acceptable, or are you conceding that it's an appalling system? And if it's an appalling system, why? And how do we improve it?
I'm saying it's far better than it was under British Rail. So you've had me reiterate an answer I already gave by dint of a long question, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
I mean, I have to say, Alex, I'm so shocked I felt the need to reiterate it.
Well, all right, but gas bag on your time, not mine. So my point about, on your point about subsidies, you've got to realise that if we hadn't had these things under private ownership and the injection that we got from private capital in the course of the privatisation process, then all that money would be being spent on the railways by the state in any case, not least because we just had fares impacted by the result of almost nobody taking the railways for 2 years. So, I mean, reality bites at some point, Paul, and of course there was going to be there was going to be a significant re-evaluation in this country when we deliberately plunged our economy into decline over coronavirus and many more people work from home. But anyway, I wanted to talk about what Michelle actually asked about. HS2. It's a difficult one for me and as a Conservative, because on the one hand, I completely buy a lot of the arguments that are made in the course of this, not least by Paul. I believe in conserving the environment. I think that there are reasonable discussions in that, although I will point out, we got into this during Brexit. This is not a small country. You know, people were constantly saying that the UK was a tiny island off the coast of Europe and so forth. It's one of the top 10 biggest islands in the world.
When I say small
We're not
country,
that much smaller than France.
Geographically, it's a small country.
No,
I mean, that's the context in which I'm talking about.
Yes, and that was wrong. In terms of European countries, we're not a small country, and many European countries have a more complex and varied rail system in smaller territories. So I don't buy that for a second. So I wouldn't, in your shoes, if I wanted to oppose HS2, talk about that. I talk about money and where that money's gone. And the difficulty is, from a pragmatic political perspective, a lot of money's been spent in it already, and then you've got to make the evaluation. Are you now so committed that you should carry on? Or is it sunk cost, should you, in the business term, or is it good money after bad, in your old-fashioned expression our parents would use? And I think my view is that Paul's position, which says, get rid of HS2, spend more on the railway we have, ignores the point of HS2, which is actually to help out the infrastructure we already have. It's not about getting to Birmingham from London faster. It's about improving capacity. That is at the core of HS2. The fact that it's been singularly missold isn't my fault in the course of this discussion.
Seems to be a mightily unproductive and uneconomical way of going about investing or improving the current railway system that we've got. I mean, surely you would agree with me that the better way to do that, if that were the purpose of it, is to plough the money into the existing railway system.
Well, it's peculiar because you tell us that so people who are experts in the healthcare system should be trusted to run the healthcare system, never mind those awful politicians interfering. Those who know most about the fire service should run the fire service. But then when those who know the rail service best say what we need to do is improve capacity, that means more lines so freight can come off the routes that are getting slowed down and interrupted for passenger service. We need to build more capacity, and the best answer is HS2. Those experts are out the window.
Well, hold on a second. I mean, you know, just because a so-called expert in the rail industry says one thing, it doesn't mean we all have to fall in line and agree with that. I mean, I'm sure there are many people working in public services who will say, you know, this is what we should do with the National Health Service, this is what we should do with the police, whether it's police chiefs, whether it's NHS trust leaders, chief executives or whatever. Can't imagine you, Alex, would say, well, these people have spoken and therefore we have to acquiesce. In fact, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't say that. So I think it's slightly hypocritical, frankly, to invoke that line just because a rail industry expert has said it. But I don't think you've addressed the point that the appalling situation at the moment in the rail system and the fact that it's an appalling service which you seem to disagree with and really, frankly, have got no solution to improving it under the current status quo in terms of it being privatised. What's the answer? How do we improve this terrible system?